Hi, at the Dodge County Historical Society, we would like to welcome you to our newest exhibit, Sacrifice and Service. This is an exhibit that looks at the proud traditions of military service and support in Beaver Dam. And we're going to take you through a brief overview. The first section you're going to see is pre-Civil War and Civil War. We're looking at different military items upstairs that kind of showcase what it was like to be in the military prior to the Civil War. And at that time period, everybody and every able-bodied member of a community was considered enlisted in the military, and they were expected to help. As we look over here then, it's not too hard to imagine that when the Civil War broke out, many members of Beaver Dam's community joined up together to form regiments and units even before Abraham Lincoln asked for people to serve. They brought their own muskets, their own weapons, and their own items, and happily enlisted in support of their country. Some of the very interesting items that we have in this section include a Civil War shell jacket and, of course, a Civil War rifle that you're welcome to pick up. And as you can imagine, it's really quite heavy. And Civil War soldiers would have to march carrying one of these for sometimes as much as 15 miles a day. One interesting individual who served in the Civil War from Beaver Dam was Horace D. Patch. He was born in New York and then moved from Ohio to Beaver Dam in 1948. He practiced law and he served in many government positions. When the war broke out, he was one of the first members to form a unit underneath his command. He did this because his son wanted to go, and he didn't want his son to go alone. Captain Horace Patch died while on the battlefield. He was beloved by his troops. His family, his son did survive the war, and his wife ended up moving to Minnesota. Some other interesting time periods that deal with military is about the military service societies. And one of those that is featured upstairs is the Grand Army of the Republic. And it was a very popular and active organization that advocated for Civil War veterans inside Beaver Dam. And inside the case, you can actually see some really unique items, mostly hats. They were modeled after Civil War hats, but they were worn by GAR members who marched in parades, advocated, and for politics, and then also served on various committees. Almost every elected official for 30 years after the Civil War was a member of the GAR. That made them a very powerful organization in the community. As we move on in Beaver Dam history, Beaver Dam had its own local guard. And guards were formed all over across the United States after the Civil War in response to the fact that most guards weren't that prepared for the Civil War. And so they recognized that as the U.S. was expanding and going west, fighting and having skirmishes with indigenous tribes, going to war with Mexico and Spain, that the U.S. would need trained soldiers. And Bircher's Guard was a very active and fun organization here in Beaver Dam. And we have a unique picture of them all. One of their members was a photographer, and he would take fun photos of them actually like eating cake or posing in their guard uniforms. Another really important part of having a military is having volunteers and people back home to support them. And these organizations grew steadily and were very active in Beaver Dam. Some of them include the Veterans of Foreign Wars, the Dodge County Veterans Association, the Red Cross, and even the Gold Star Mothers. And these provided a socializing opportunity, but also a way that these individuals and community members could help people in the military, whether it's assisting veterans or helping people who were off to war. And here we have featured Mrs. Mary Ann Seibel from Beaver Dam. Her son, Robert, had died in the war, and she became a founding member of the Gold Star Mothers. And up above, you can see one of their flags. And these women would get together and socialize, but also help out in the community in any way they could, especially with service members. And they were very passionate about making sure veterans had medical care. Some other really interesting things you're going to see is that Beaver Dam was enlisted to be part of the Red Arrow Division during World War I. And this is one of the most exciting and well-known military parts of Wisconsin history. This division was known as the Terribles. because they inspired fear. They were also they were known as a line breaker, because wherever they would put this unit in, it would always push through the German lines. And we have a trench scene here that we have recreated with soldiers from World War I. And yes, they really did dress like that. They had some heavy woolen coats. They had leg bands that wrapped around their calves to help prevent swelling during long marches. And they had those crazy helmets that almost looked like pots. And they did use them as pots. They would often flip them over, shave in them, or even like rudimentary kind of cook. They were a multi-purpose kind of thing, and then rinse them out and wear them. And as you can imagine, this was a very dirty and boring kind of life. So if you have a chance, stop upstairs and check it out. One of our other highlights in here is the American Legion. There is no organization in the United States besides the GAR that compares to how much this organization has improved communities and helped advocate for veterans, whether it's for equal pay, for continued military service, for aid. This organization has been a force for good. And in here we have just a few items. One you can see is a plate from the American Legion Auxiliary, and this was the ladies' side of that organization, and they helped do scholarships and fund and care for the wounded veterans. And then we also have some very interesting medals and badges that they would wear on their flat garrison cap. As we were moving right along the history of Beaver Dam, of course, the World Wars were so memorable because they enlisted so many people, and nothing was more memorable than World War II. And upstairs, we have quite a few things dedicated to World War II because of how life-changing it really was. Besides young men going off to war, we ended up having the Army and military enlist any young women as well to serve in non-combat roles. And here we have featured Ms. Jean A. Beers, who ended up joining the Navy and becoming a wave. She traveled as part of her job and served, and she was so proud to have helped enlist in the war effort. She ended up leaving after her fiance, Alfred Hankes, was discharged from the Coast Guard, and then that ended her military service. In here, we also have featured some really unique items. Some of them include trigger finger gloves that airplane pilots would wear while they were shooting things in the cold air, because many times those guns were actually exposed. And as you're driving in the airplane, it would chill your fingers. Some other cool items that we have related to World War II have to do with on the home front. And one of the most exciting is a propeller from Civil Air Patrol members who crashed while doing bomb practice drills. And the Civil Air Patrol was a group of local airmen who were not enlisted, who realized that pilots who had private planes could really help in the war effort by patrolling the coast or helping spot enemy planes or guarding shipping. And that's exactly what they did. And members from Beaver Dam were practicing in drills and then ultimately did crash. That one was rather entertaining. And one of the most exciting and memorable workplaces during the war industries was Monarch, who completely changed from making ranges and other types of metal kitchen appliances to making artillery shells and truck parts, as well as canisters for the war effort. And right here you can see we have a red and green canister, and we suspect that the red, of course, would have been for gasoline and the green would have been for water or some other chemical. But Monarch began to employ many women from Beaver Dam who helped make shells for the war effort, and they would continue to make shells throughout the Korean War. And here you can see a really cool wooden shell tooling gauge that they would use to make sure when shells would come off the line, they would insert that in, and if it could slide in just perfectly or around it, then they knew that the shell was the right case and the machine did not need to be adjusted. If it wouldn't go in the right way, then they knew the machine was off. After World War II, the United States sort of entered a new era as being a global power with new responsibilities, and that meant new fears. And one of the most poignant fears was actually about a nuclear holocaust, and with that came the establishment of the Civil Defense. And that was an organization to teach people to make fallout shelters and how to survive a nuclear war, what to happen if Russia invaded, and there was a great fervor around it. And what we have in this exhibit is rations that people were encouraged to purchase and store in their house or in their community, but also anti-Soviet propaganda and a fallout shelter guide. And the library was even turned into an observation post. And up in the very top of them was created a little office and tower where somebody would look for planes and learn to spot enemy planes. Once the fear of this subsided, these things were no longer needed, but they're a poignant reminder of how much the community worked to try and make sure that they could defend themselves if we were indeed involved in a nuclear war. One of the important changes for Beaver Dam was the loss of its local guard, and that happened at the same time that the United States established the Army Reserve System. That local guard, known as Burchard's Guard, had gone to the Spanish-American War, and then in World War I, and then again in World War II, and again in Korea. And after Korea, the United States realized local guards needed to be better equipped and better trained, and they made them part of the Army system and called it the Army Reserve. And Beaver Dam had its own office established, which still exists today, right across from the high school. This was part of the 84th Infantry Division, and we have some interesting things here. Also, our local guard was sort of divided up, and it became part of the Wisconsin Army National Guard. And they still carry today the title of the Red Arrows, the same that they had from World War I. And they're a wonderful, hardworking group of people who protect our community and our country. Two very interesting items in this case. One is the Bucky Badger Wisconsin National Guard beer can. And I love seeing Bucky Badger dressed as a National Guardsman. Also, we have records that were played on the local radio station by the Army Reserves of Beaver Dam, and they were part of a recruiting program. So it would have music, funny shows, and then also recruitment messages. Vietnam was another important era, and many people from Beaver Dam enlisted into the Army to serve. The United States Army Reserves, Local 84th Division, was called up, and they went and served in Beaver Dam. And you can see the 84th Division patch here on Major Houlihan's jacket. One of the most famous people from Beaver Dam to have served was Michael R. Banks. He won a Distinguished Flying Cross Award for his heroic efforts in extracting a group of men who were under heavy fire by the Vietnam Cong. And you can see here his picture, and this is his original helmet that he wore. We also have an interesting story here by Jean Charles Norenberg, who shared after he was released or after he retired. He served as an Army refueler for many of the spy planes that existed. And these are his patches then as he traveled all over the world to different bases. One of the most interesting things you'll see is our G.I. Joe toy collection that's up in the exhibit. Now, why are they here? Well, the original creator of the exhibit, Bob Frankenstein, loved toys. And he knew that if he included toys in the military exhibit, younger kids would be more excited. And younger kids are still excited by all the weapons and other things too. And so we have a lovely collection of pretty much vintage G.I. Joe toys, and we're leaving them inside our military exhibit in honor of Bob Frankenstein. You'll notice that this section is a little bit empty, and that's because it is awaiting future donations. This section is going to highlight military service today. Military service today isn't just through your little local guard unit, but it includes so many different avenues of people who've enlisted, whether in the reserves, the Wisconsin National Guards, the Coast Guard, the Navy, or the Air Force. Many of these didn't exist when Beaver Dam first became a community, and there was only the local Burchard's Guard to join. As you can see here, one of our highlights is Michelle Ovens. She joined the Navy and served for 17 years, achieving the rank of Chief Petty Officer. And here we have her 2 uniforms. One interesting thing is this certificate that she received for crossing the equator, and it's actually really colorful. In addition to that, these cases are for future donations for people who have served in some of the conflicts that have happened more recently, including Bosnia-Herzegovina and Desert Storm. Over here is also a special section. Even if military involvement isn't quite the same, there are still so many people passionate about honoring veterans and making sure that they are remembered in our community and that they have chances to socialize and be active. And two of them that are featured here on our wall includes a Boy Scout troop who has created a Veterans Honor Walk in Beaver Dam. And these banners are hung around, and they are a walk where you can walk around and see them. And we've given an example. There's also the Horicon Marsh Veterans Hunt, which is a really popular activity that takes place every year. Thank you so much for taking a brief tour of our exhibit. If you can, we'd like you to come upstairs and see for yourself and enjoy the rich history Beaver Dam has to offer.